Welcome to the Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, produced by the Caribbean Leadership Program under the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, CARICAD, where we provide a number of leadership development interventions tailored for the Caribbean context in support of public sector transformation as well as regional development. In this Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, we will be discussing a range of leadership issues within the public sector context which impact our national and regional development in the Caribbean.
The Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, where Caribbean leaders discuss Caribbean leadership. Here's your host, Dr. Lloyd Parks.
Today we are looking at leadership development. Looking at it from the perspective of how do we actually develop and roll out and implement leadership development programming in our public sector context. And we are very privileged today to have with us none other than Mrs. Miguelle Christopher. Miguelle Christopher is Trinidadian by birth, but she resides in Antigua and Barbuda, and she is currently the Deputy Permanent Secretary and Chief Training Officer in the government of Antigua and Barbuda. She has had an extensive professional career, mainly in the public services of Trinidad and Tobago, Montserrat, and Antigua and Barbuda, and her work covers the areas of policy development, community empowerment, education, of course, and more recently, learning and development in her current role. She is the former director of the Public Sector Reform Unit in the Antigua government. She has worked with us extensively in the Caribbean Leadership Project. She was one of the original members of our very first technical working group that helped to design this product that we call the Caribbean Leadership Program. She is currently pursuing doctoral studies in education, and she is focused specifically on training and development, particularly for leaders. So we have somebody who's well able to speak to us about this particular topic. Mrs. Christopher, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good, love to hear you, Loy. And I'm just saying hello to all of my Caribbean Leadership Project colleagues out there, especially.
Start off by sharing a little bit with us about how you progressed into the field of public sector leadership and management.
Well, Loy, I think to a certain extent, this work is probably in my DNA. I grew up with two parents who were both public sector employees. They were both public sector managers, when they retired. And so I always had that orientation towards the public service. After my university life, I went to the University of the West Indies at St. Augustine, and 99% of my career has been in the public service. I started off in Trinidad in policy work, looking at government policies as they relate to community development, community empowerment in particular. And after I got married, I went to live in Montserrat. And in Montserrat, I was involved in women's health education, in family life education. Again, a lot of community development type work. And then after the Soufriere Hills eruption, the volcano, we decided, we stayed with it for a little bit and then decided to move to Antigua. And that is where I got into teaching. My father was actually a teacher, a school principal for that matter. But so I guess, and I always said, I'll never teach. But actually that turned out to be, the exact opposite. I spent
Same for me too. My father was a teacher, and I ended up in the field of learning and development.
Exactly. It was, and he was. I mean, not because he was my father, but he really was one of the best, and a model that, whether I realized it or not at the time, that it was one that I wanted to adopt in terms of the level of excellence, the genuine love and interest of people development, community development, and country development.
Speaking of development, we're going to just segue into your experience being a part of our very first technical working group.
Right.
What were some of the lessons learned through that process? The technical working group was really involved in how do we create a leadership development program for the public service of the Caribbean. What were some of the lessons you learned being involved in that process?
I think one of the more, there were several of them, and they were learning lessons not just for design, but for ourselves as well, as public sector leaders. But I think one of the key things that I think came out of that process was the importance of getting of showing leaders how they can develop that self, that mastery of self. It was about, because every leader that will come to the program would be in a different context. So there would be different economic situations. There would be maybe some differences in structure or whatever. But in each situation, a leader has to develop a sense of who they are as leaders and who they want to be as leaders. And in developing the Caribbean leadership, the leadership development program, that, you know, as when we were part of the technical working group, those are the kinds of things that came out quite a bit. And that was something that was a thought process that was fairly new to me. So above anything else, I think that was one of the things that stood out for us as members of the technical working group. So yes, we were in developing the program. Yes, we would have done maybe some of the practical elements of leadership, but that developing a program that will help leaders to understand who they are as leaders, you know, that I thought was something that stood out for me.
And I think that is something that is particularly unique about leadership development programming, as opposed to, say, teaching somebody how to use a Microsoft Suite, for example.
Correct.
There is that element that ultimately the individual participant, the individual learner and leader has to bring to the table that level of will, as it were, to determine they want to grow as a leader. They actually have full control over who they become as leaders.
That's correct.
And us as a facilitator, really, we are, as we love to say, we are just the guides on the side.
Correct. Yeah, it's sort of like, and that was a particularly important element for me to get as well. You know, it's about helping people discover who they are, not telling them who they are or what they're supposed to do, but you are taking them through a process of self-discovery as leaders. And that, you know, I find it both powerful and humbling at the same time.
Yes.
And that you know, I could be part of that process. And then, you know, you start to think of you know, how risky, in a sense, that is.
Oh, yes.
Part of somebody else's development.
We're going to take a very short break. When we return, we are going to explore that topic a little bit more and look at some of the benefits that you yourself derived as a participant in our leadership development program.
The Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, where Caribbean leaders discuss Caribbean leadership. The Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, where Caribbean leaders discuss Caribbean leadership.
Welcome back to the Caribbean Leadership Radio Series. Today we are looking at leadership development programming in the Caribbean context in our public services in the region. And we are happy to have with us Mrs. Miguelle Christopher, Chief Training Officer and Deputy Permanent Secretary with responsibility for training and development in the government of Antigua and Barbuda. Right before the break, we were talking about one of the issues of leadership development being that the leader, who is the learner in your leadership development program, has to have the will to make that determination as to how they plan to develop themselves as leaders, as opposed to other types of learning where you're just imparting knowledge that you hope that people just absorb. Apart from being in our technical working group, you eventually became one of our participants. You were part of cohort 6. Tell us about that experience. C6 Possibilities, that was the name of your group. What were the major benefits you derived in terms of how you developed personally as a leader?
Zoe, that is one of the easiest questions you could ask me. More than anything, I think for me, the benefit was the network of colleagues. That was the first time that I had the opportunity to work with persons from other territories in our region. And to this day, I can still call on my cohort brothers and sisters if I am working on something at the office, even as part of my doctoral studies, or just to say hi, just to say how are you doing. We still have that close network, and I think that makes a whole lot of difference to how we lead. And in a sense, the second benefit is for me, my work had a wider purpose. I started to see the training and development work that I was doing as something that was bigger than the training division or the training unit that I was working for. All of a sudden, the successes of my work became successes that could be multiplied regionally. And that I got from being part of that leadership development program at the CLP.
And it's interesting. So we have in our leadership development programs what we call a number of cross-cutting themes, and one of them is actually regional integration. And so often we see regional integration as something prime ministers of the region do through the CARICOM Secretariat, and that is correct. But I think one of the things we all learned from how we have rolled out our Caribbean leadership program is that regional integration can also be a bottom-up approach where we as professionals together can learn what each other is doing, learn how we can support each other.
Right.
And that is something that can be done face-to-face as well as virtually.
Correct.
And it's something that's quite powerful. So take us into your leadership stretch project. So everybody who did our leadership development program had to do a leadership stretch project. And Miguelle decided to do her stretch project in her training unit, and she was going to actually develop a senior leadership development program for the government of Antigua, using a lot of the templates and models and designs from the CLP. But tell us about that project.
I chose that because I believe very strongly in the concept of paying it forward. I gained so much as a leader, as a senior manager in the public service, from the philosophies and the approaches and the tools from the leadership development program that I experienced. There are most of the senior leaders in our service would not have had the benefit of being on CLP, being on that leadership program. So I felt, why not bring it to them?
And in addition to that, Antigua and many of our territories too, we are about to face a serious attrition by virtue of age among our senior leaders. So there was a need to think of the next generation of senior leaders that needed to come up.
Right. And you needed to have something, a program that could prepare persons for not just management, but for leadership. So I used, in a sense, many of the tools, many of the lessons that I learned on CLP, and sort of tailored it for the Antigua and Barbuda context. And I started off with a group, but we had a group of 13 senior leaders at the time. I took them through a program that lasted almost the length of time, roughly about 9 to 10 months, with 5 different modules. And yeah, we were able to graduate our first cohort of senior leaders. There had never been a program like that in Antigua before. There have been leadership programs, but they would last a week, and they would be done by, there would be programs that were bought wholesale from an external provider. This was the first one that was modular, and they're developed specifically for Antigua and Barbuda. So it was new in that sense. And I mean, the persons that participated up to this day, still talk about how much they benefited from a program like that. And I think it's possible for any of the territories, in our region to do a similar program.
What would you say were some of the major challenges you faced? Because I know there were many. Let me hasten to say I was actually an executive coach with the program.
Well, apart from a hurricane happening in the middle of the program.
Oh, yes.
Actually, that, and as a matter of fact, that was more of a benefit than a challenge, but we will, because I saw leaders within the program have to step up to the plate, and they could come back and say, this program really helped me as I function in my role in an emergency situation. But in terms of challenges, I think apart from the funding, of course, funding would have been promised, but we had to make adjustments because we would not have had all of the funding that we would have wanted. But people, in the end, it did not affect us as much as we thought. The thing that to me was the biggest challenge was trying to do leadership development program with persons who are local in a sense. Because they are physically there in the country, there is always the opportunity for a minister to say, "Oh, I need you to come to this meeting." Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be on a development program for a week, and it was a real struggle for some of the learners, the leader learners, to come and spend the time that was required in session.
We're going to take a short break, but we want to continue on this question of the challenges that you faced rolling out this program. You are listening to the Caribbean Leadership Radio Series. We will return after this short break.
The Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, where Caribbean leaders discuss Caribbean leadership. The Caribbean Leadership Radio Series, where Caribbean leaders discuss Caribbean leadership.
You're listening to the Caribbean Leadership Radio Series. We're here today with Miguelle Christopher, Chief Training Officer and Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Training Department in the Government of Antigua and Barbuda. And we are looking at leadership development programming for the Caribbean public sector context. Before the break, we were discussing some of the challenges that the government of Antigua and Barbuda faced in rolling out its own local leadership development program. Mrs. Christopher, can you just continue on that point? You were saying that making sure that senior leaders are given the time to dedicate to leadership development was one of the issues. Were there other challenges?
Yes. Well, the one other challenge we had, and that was in a sense was related to cost. It is ensuring that you have a good batch of facilitators.
Yes.
When we did the leadership program, we were very fortunate to have you, Loy, as our executive coach. Because of the funding, if we didn't have that conversation about the importance of the coaching element to it, I would have dropped it. Because we could not have, under normal circumstances, afforded, a really qualified, private coach for the leaders who are on the program. But thanks to your generosity, we were able to have the coaching, and the learners were talking about what a difference the executive coaching made as part of that leadership development program. So it is having a batch of really good leadership development trainers, facilitators, I should say, to be part of the program. I had to do a lot of the facilitation myself, but fortunately, I was able to have, a few others who came along with me and really, really came and made a huge difference to the program.
Yeah.
So I would like to see going forward and when cohort 2 comes, that at least that element of it is really done and done well.
And that's one of the things that we're aiming to do through CARICAD and the Caribbean Leadership Program, is to have that community of practice regionally that we can pull on, so we can use you in other territories, and you can use facilitators and coaches and other resources from other parts of the Caribbean, where we can share the costs together.
Correct. Yeah.
What were some of the major successes and lessons learned from implementing your senior leadership program in Antigua?
I think if you listen to the persons, if I were to listen to the persons who participated in it, they too have benefited from the network that they created. As small as Antigua is, you would be surprised that, you work in different ministries and you kind of just focus on the people that are in your ministry. Those are the people that are part of your network. But in terms of working across ministries, I think that was one of because there were persons from so many different departments of government here in Antigua, they were able to start realizing that there are resources outside of their own ministry that they could depend on. So they too have a network that still is going very strong. Right? They call on each other, they help each other, they support each other, they celebrate when their members of their cohort have accomplished things. We all get together and celebrate. So those things, and I think for leaders in the public service, that kind of support and community is so important. So I think that to me was one of the successes. Plus the hunger. They have a cohort was successful. They went through a program, they graduated, people can see the difference in how they function, and others want to be part of it as well. So that interest in their own development as leaders is growing and growing. And I think that to me was one of the other major successes.
You say people saw the difference in how these participants were functioning as leaders. Can you give examples?
Well, apart from one or two of them receiving promotions since then, the way in which as I said, in between there was a hurricane.
Yes.
And one of our leaders was called on to lead emergency recovery, not just here in Antigua, but regionally. He was posted to like 2 or 3 different islands over the course of a few months.
Yes.
And he kept on talking about how much the tools, and that wasn't even at the end of the program, right? That was like maybe 3/4 way through. And he was talking about how he was able to use the tools that he learned in the leadership development program to help him to be successful at, assisting our persons both here in Antigua and regionally to get things together, to pick themselves up, to move on from the devastation that we saw in that hurricane.
That is one of the things I can tell you. It might sound as a bit of self-promotion, but really and truly, the tools that we teach in our leadership programs, they are very practical. They can be applied tomorrow.
That's right.
It's not theoretical. It is really based on real world application and can be applied as long as you have the will to do so. Our final question really is, what recommendations do you have for strengthening leadership development programming, whether nationally in Antigua or regionally in the Caribbean?
Continue to build the community of practice. We really need persons who are called to the development of others, to work together, because in the end, the benefits are multiplied regionally, right? So we need to continue to build that, to encourage persons to be part of that community that plans for development of others. That to me would be one of the major parts of leadership development programming. The other thing I think is keep it relevant.
Yes.
Keep it. So we have to keep asking ourselves, not just plan a program and that program stays forever and ever, but keep asking ourselves, are we still relevant? What tools we are sharing, are they still relevant? Are there different ways that we could be looking at this? So, always be asking questions, always asking of the persons that we are supposed to be serving, are we helping you? Has this helped? Has this worked?
Yes. Are there new problems that have emerged and new issues?
Exactly.
Yes.
I think also we need to understand that this is important and we need to commit ourselves to funding it.
Yes.
Right? If we want something that's good, if we want something that's sustainable, if we want something that lasts, we have to pay for it.
Indeed.
And yes, we have to find a way to do it as cost effectively as possible, but we have to understand that this is something that we have to invest in. So that would be, my appeal, if not recommendation, my appeal to keep it going. We have something great here, and, something that works. Let us ensure that it survives. Let us ensure that more persons can benefit from what we are doing.
Well, Mrs. Christopher, it has indeed been a pleasure hearing from you, and we want to thank you for generously sharing with us today. You've been listening to the Caribbean Leadership Radio Series. Please check with this station for other episodes in our series. To learn more about the Caribbean Leadership Program, please visit our website at www.caribbeanleadership.org. Thanks for joining us.